you want some careers. Yeah, you did.
Yeah, so they say.
So I'm gonna
absolutely.
say that Roxanne Shante was ether before Nas made ether. She was ether, right?
I like that.
And the list goes on. You got into the hip hop game at the age of 14.
Yes.
All right. So I want to kind of go back now to 14 and pre-14.
Okay.
I want to know about the young lady growing up in Queensbridge and going to school.
Okay.
How was your schooling? And let me ask you this question. Mm-hmm. At 14, when you got into the business, were you still going to school, or did you jump headfirst into your career?
Well, we're going to go back a little. We're going to go a little bit before that,
sure,
until we get to that, up to that point. Growing up in Queensbridge, which is the largest housing project in the world, not just in the city, it's the largest in the world as far as tenants and occupants go. Because usually they say that there's 10,000 on paper, 30,000 any given day. That's like when your cousins come stay, friends come stay, this one lives with somebody, so they said 30,000 any day. So growing up in that type of neighborhood is like growing up inside of a small city. And so everything you needed was actually there. You didn't have any reason to leave Queensbridge. So a lot of your education, everything took place there. My mom, she's a wonderful woman, and she's truly a visionary. So she sees things ahead of time. And I pleaded and begged. I wanted to go to this school called 111. 111 was just a block away from the projects. And it was the fact that because we never really left the projects at that time, you wanted to actually go to school with everyone from the projects. You just wanted to. And my mom was like, no, you're not. I'm signing you up with this program called a bus child. And a bus child meant you had to get on a school bus and they took you outside of your area, outside of your district, because they didn't call it districts at that time. Back then, they were still calling it area. They were still calling it neighborhood. They were still calling it your place. So you had to go outside of your neighborhood and go into another neighborhood, and be exposed to another entirely different culture. And this way you would experience education from that level. My mother was like, that's what we're gonna do. So I went to a school, instead of going to PS 111, I wound up going to a school called PS 11, which was located in Woodside, Queens. And the area was, at that time, predominantly Irish and Italians. So in all of my pictures from school, which I should have brought some in with me, but there's some like on Facebook and Instagram and things like that, I was the only black child in all of my classes. So
how was that?
It was spooky, it was scary, it was hard to deal with. And my mom had this whole idea about, listen, I would come home with, literally, like, being 6 years old, I would come home with certain like horror stories, because to me they were horror stories. Like, Mom, nobody wants to play with me. When I go out into the schoolyard, because this was when it was still mandatory to go out in the schoolyard. This was when you had no choice. Like now, kids have choices. Kids get doctor's notes. Parents are scared of being, the kids getting hurt. Schools are scared of being sued. So nobody goes out and play. I remember when you had to put your coat on, it was 0 degrees. We had to sit out there like as if you were in Shawshank. We'd be out there like this in the yard. Literally, that's how it was. And I was like, Mom, they don't want to play with me. And she was like, listen, you ain't got to play with them. When you grow up in life, you ain't going to be playing with them. So this is what you got to do. This is what you got to deal with them. And I'm like, okay. So I became like token Lolita, because originally my name is Lolita. So I went into school already being able to read and write, which was a bonus, because when I came into school, my penmanship in the first grade was that of a third grader. So my vocabulary of in the first grade was that of a sixth grader.
That was from home,
and that was from home, because my mom what she did was, we had this big, heavy typewriter that it took my mom and my neighbor, Miss Greta, to actually carry the typewriter and put it up on a dresser, and you could not move it. And my mom, instead of getting ribbons, because the ribbons were very expensive, my mom had got us some thing called, I don't know if people notice, I'm getting ready to give away my age, but it's called soul dressing. Soul dressing is like a black dye that you would use for the soles of your shoes, but it came with a little sponge and it was inside of an ink bottle. And we would use the soul dressing to actually wipe onto the ribbon to keep the dye going. So this way we'd have ink and do it that way. So I came in already knowing ASD, FJKL, semicolon, already knowing how to type.
I remember that.
Yes. Home kids.
I remember
exactly.
that.
Home kids.
Yes.
Exactly. So, so I already came into school ahead. so far ahead of, the other students. And my mom said, listen, in order to be successful, you're going to always have to stay ahead of them.
Now, let me ask you this question. I know we're there, but I'm just curious since you brought it up. The foundation that your mother provided for you,
Yes.
with you going in already well educated and having a strong foundation,
Yes.
and then what you were doing in that school, did that in any way impact your art and your ability to write as the rhymes that you wrote?
Well, my rhymes were all done Nipsey Russell syndrome, which means that you just have the ability to rhyme off the top of your head. So I've never really sat down and wrote rhymes. Everything was always off the top of my head. Wow. And what the school did allow, or what the children, or what their meanness, or even with the racism that I dealt with, what it did allow me to have was a very tough skin. So going into being a battle rapper, having a very tough skin, there was nothing you could say to me that I hadn't already heard. There was no verbal attack that you could place on me that was going to affect me at 14 if it didn't destroy me at 6. I remember my first time going back to school after they had played Roots. I was 8 years old. I was in the 3rd grade. My teacher's name was Miss Weinstein. And at that time, and I recall these things like they were yesterday, was the fact that now the N-word was the new word of the day because it was on TV for a whole entire week. So the kids came in and said, oh yeah, we know what Lolita is. This is what she is. So I'm going to make this a real short story and then we can get to the other part. We did a time capsule. We went outside, they dug up in there, they said, okay, look, everybody, we're gonna do a time capsule, and inside the time capsule, everybody throw in something that we're gonna open up 30 years from now, or I think it was like 25 years from now, we're gonna open up this time capsule. So I'm on one side, and I go and I put in, like a cute little picture, that's what I'm gonna put in there. And I remember looking across from me, and we're just gonna call the student AA, even though I know his name, but I just don't wanna do that to him now because things may have changed. Right. So we're gonna call him the student AA. So AA, he said, Lolita. And I looked across and he's like, Lolita, look. And I looked at the note, and the note said Lolita is a N-word. And he took it and he folded it up. And I'm trying to, and at this time, still being very polite, I'm raising my hand trying to get the teacher's attention, because this is when you had to raise your hand. I'm raising my hand like, Miss Weinstein, like, please look at me, because look what Alex is getting ready to throw into the time capsule. Like, So this was going to be put in a time capsule for people to dig up years later. So he folded it up, and I'm calling her, and she's like, Lolita, not now. And he folded it up, and he threw it in a time capsule. They closed the time capsule, and they buried it. I went home hysterical. I rode on the bus crying. I get home. So now my mom, being from the South, her biggest fear is, what happened to you that has you crying hysterically? What took place in school? Was there some type of attack? Was there something that took place? What happened to you? Why are you crying like this? And I couldn't get myself together. And then finally I came out and I told her, I said, he wrote a note. And on the note, he wrote, Lolita is a, and I said the N-word. So my mom, at that time, moms, people, when their nerves get shot at that time, they would want to roll up a little something, whatever, So my mom was like, okay, so now her nerves is good now. So she said, now tell me again, because now she relieved because she knows nothing physical. So she says, let me tell you something. When they open up that time capsule, 25 years from now, you will still be, you know what I'm saying? She said, like, you will still be the N-word. She said, but the catch is, what type of N-word will you be in 25 years? Because see, they're always going to say that. That's always going to be in the back of their mind. But who will you be in 25 years when they open up that capsule? Now that's what you concentrate on.
Wow.
And so I made it my business to make sure that I was there when they opened it up. And they were all this big hoopla about Roxanne Shante. She went to school with us and everything else. And my main purpose was to be there when they opened up the time capsule so that I could retrieve the note, so that I could see, and so that I would be able to show them exactly what I had become. And that was actually in my mind for a very long time, like the whole thing, but he didn't understand what he had did for me, was he had actually put me on my path to greatness. And I'm still very humble, I'm a very humble person, but I just want to say that he placed me on my path to greatness just from that one note.